We also have to deal with Cindy Sherman. Now, the photographer, Cindy Sherman, uses makeup, costume, and lighting effects to create portraits of herself in various scenarios that parody stereotypes of women. Her characters and settings are drawn from sources of popular culture, old movies, soap operas, and pulp magazines. So she's presenting us with a very stereotypical view of what it is to be a woman. But it goes a little bit deeper. Her approach forms an ironic message that creation is impossible without the use of prototypes, and that identity lies in appearance, not reality. Let's tear that apart for a moment. So, she's forming this ironic message that creation is impossible without the use of prototypes. In other words, you cannot create something original from nothing. You will always create something as a continued evolution of a theme or idea. And we hear that again towards the end, although she's pointing out that much of life, male life, female life, life in general, can be described more as an aesthetic than any kind of reality. This concept that we hear on a regular basis, that perception can be flawed, and therefore we can't really know what's real because our perception isn't necessarily the same. It's not universal for everyone. And even if it were, so much of the world is based on aesthetics, on appearances. After all, why are you wearing the clothes that you're wearing? Why do you cut your hair the way that you do? It's all about appearance. It's about trying to show people who are outside of you some side of you, some element of you. Whether it's real or not is completely irrelevant. And Sherman's getting at that, the artificiality of life in Western culture in the 20th and 21st century. Her work implicates the viewer in the meaning of the work, inviting us to project our own interpretation. Now, what she's doing for the most part is taking a photograph, and from that photograph, we are expected to create an interpretation. So we are as much the artist as Cindy Sherman is herself. By applying our idea, by applying our interpretation, we're actually finishing the piece. So it's as much our art as it is hers. And here we see Untitled film still number 21. Now, when the Museum of Modern Art announced in 1996 that it had just acquired Cindy Sherman's complete Untitled film still series, the curators knew they had laid claim to one of the most representative works of the early 1980s American movement of appropriation and simulationism. Both terms refer to American artists mimicking, in the first half of the 1980s, former art masterpieces, or widely circulating images in the mass media, and critically reworking them to arouse a sense of unease in the viewer. Indeed, often suggesting that culture had become largely a game of theatrical posing and egotistical pretense. And culture has, to a large degree. We look at the world around us and it's all an aesthetic. Why do you buy the car that you buy? I'm willing to bet that it's not because that's the best car that you can get given your lifestyle. I'm willing to bet there's some element of keeping up the Joneses in that. Now, maybe you're a college student and it came down to this is the only car I can afford, and that's a little different situation. So much of our lives is nothing more than a representation, and Sherman is trying to show us that. Here, Sherman takes on the role of a small-town girl who just happened upon the big city. So this sort of movie trope of the innocent young girl who's trying to make it big, moving to the big city, doesn't know anything that's going on, is out of place, but out of place in this very sweet sort of way. She is typically at first suspicious of the metropolitan lights and shadows, only to be eventually seduced by their undeniable attractions. Now, of course, when we look at this image, we get that appearance of innocence, that sense of someone who wants to belong but doesn't, someone who can easily be taken advantage of, someone who is so sweet as to be saccharine and almost artificial. And yet that's so often an act, it's a trope, it's not something that happens all the time. It's not a common experience. It's simply one part of the human condition that we like to look at. And Sherman's pointing that out, that this isn't real life. This is fantasy.